Welcome to the webinar. My name is Alyssa Tucker. I am APQC's Principal Research Lead in Human Capital Management. I've been working at APQC for 10 plus years, and throughout this time, HR shared services has been one of the hottest topics among our members. And that's because HR shared services organizations can deliver many benefits to a business, including lowered HR costs, faster HR response times, higher quality HR services, and more time for strategic collaboration between HR business partners and business leaders. So recently, APQC and ScottMadden completed the 8th cycle of our HR shared services benchmarking study. And I'm excited to welcome Karen Hilton and Molly Donofrio, partners in ScottMadden's corporate and shared services practice, to talk to us about the results. Molly Donofrio is the HCM practice lead at ScottMadden. Having joined ScottMadden in 2006, Molly has spent the last 17 years focused on corporate and shared services design, assessment, implementation, and change management. Her consulting expertise is in global service delivery implementation, process improvement, HR and payroll systems implementation, and training and communications. Karen Hilton is a research lead at ScottMadden. She has more than 20 years of consulting experience with ScottMadden and is focused on shared services design and implementation, process improvement, benchmarking, organizational design and restructuring, internal customer satisfaction surveys, and cost reduction analysis. Within shared services, she has expertise in HR and service-centered design and implementation. So welcome to the webinar, Molly and Karen.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. We're excited to be here today and speak with all of you. All right. I'm just gonna get us started here. We're gonna give a brief introduction about ScottMadden and the work we do, and then talk a little bit about the study that has been going on for a number of years now. And then we'll share a framework for HR improvement that we're using to organize the content today, and a way that you can kind of think about examining ways that you can improve your operations. Most of our time will be spent discussing some of the trends, benchmarks, and improvement levers that you can be thinking about to try to advance your operations. And then finally, we'll save some time at the end for wrap up and questions. All right. So just a little background about ScottMadden. We celebrated our 40th anniversary this year, and we've been doing shared services work with our clients since the early 90s, when it was really starting to emerge as a new and improved delivery model for providing HR services to the business. HR is a core specialty of ours and represents a significant amount of our work. We also do shared services work in other functional areas, as well as helping clients think about multifunction and global business services models. We do work across industries. Our firm got its start in the energy industry, and we have a practice area focused on other types of consulting in energy. But our corporate and shared services practice is very much cross industry, and we'll show some examples of that in just a minute. And we do work with clients across all sort of parts of the evolution of a shared services model. So that includes things like helping initially assess the opportunities for moving to shared services, doing detailed analysis of your current work, and helping to build a business case to transition to shared services. Then getting involved in the design and implementation, which involves lots of different aspects. And then finally, helping a lot of organizations that may already have a shared services model improve their operations. That's going to be a bit more of our focus today, because the benchmarking study really is focused on companies that are operating shared services. But you'll see a lot of the things that perhaps maybe you went through or may have considered while implementing the model all still can represent some opportunities for improvement. And this just shows some of the breadth of our clients. We have pretty significant experience across a lot of different industries represented here. This is just a sampling of some of the clients that we've worked with. Historically, I would say the shared services model has typically been more adapted by larger organizations. And so we do a lot of work with Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies, but we are seeing more mid-sized organizations moving to a shared services model as well. Okay, so getting into a little more background about the benchmarking study. This has been a long partnership that we've had with APQC dating back to 2011. And prior to that, we were members with APQC, and we really felt like there was a gap in available benchmarks specific to the shared services delivery model. And since that's a core area where we work with our clients, that was important data for us to have in helping advise clients on what the right staffing level should be and so forth. So knowing that, we decided to partner with APQC. APQC obviously has a very robust benchmarking methodology that we wanted to take advantage of. So we worked with them and really provided the design and content for the survey, and then they are the ones that execute and ensure the data quality and so forth as it goes through the process, and are responsible for getting all the participation. So this is our 8th cycle that we're reporting on now. We started out doing it annually, and then we'd switched to doing it biannually. And on the alternate years, we do run a similar finance shared services study. So if you have peers that may be interested, please let them know about that. We'll talk a little bit about how to let us know about your interest in the HR study later, but we will be running the finance study in 2024. And so from its initiation, our study has focused on 4 main topic areas. So there are questions and metrics about delivery model and operations. There are a lot of benchmarks around staffing levels in different parts of shared services and HR overall. There are a number of other performance metrics, and then a number of questions more so on the qualitative side about your shared services infrastructure and technology. And we've continued to evolve that portion as intelligent automation has become more prominent in the space. But it's quite robust overall in the study. There's 52 metrics and 31 qualitative questions. And this page just shows a little bit about the participant demographics in this last cycle. We had a pretty good distribution in terms of company size, industry, as well as maturity of the shared services model. The study is geared toward organizations that are headquartered in North America, but it does allow for capturing data about centers operating in global regions outside of North America. So you'll see in the middle pie chart there, there are some centers represented in other geographic areas. And overall, about 86% of the participants this year do operate in multiple geographic global regions. Most of the charts that you'll see throughout our presentation today represent data from the current cycle, which is roughly 100 participating companies. There are a few places where you'll see some trend charts showing comparison across prior cycles. And it's roughly been about 100 participating companies each cycle. So we'd like to understand a little bit about our audience today. And so if you can take a minute to answer 2 quick polling questions for us. We want to understand sort of the breadth of your operation, your HR shared services, and then also how long has your shared services organization been in place? So we'll give that just a minute to get some responses, and then we'll get to see a little bit about our audience today. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so it looks like we've got pretty good representation across the geographic regions, and then also a little bit heavier in the 5 to 10 years, but pretty good balance across the years of maturity. So that looks great. Thanks for that insight. Okay, so as I mentioned, we wanted to provide a little context as we go through this. And this is a fairly simplified picture of typical maturity curve, or the evolution that we see with HR shared services. So Obviously, when you're just getting started, there's a lot of things that you're focused on in terms of policy harmonization, redesigning processes to fit the new model, making sure you have the right organizational structure in place, and also the right enabling technologies to support your shared services. And then as you grow and mature, often the focus shifts a little bit, and you might be thinking about expanding the services that you provide to the business, as well as potentially the geographic regions that you support or lines of business that you support if you started out in a smaller way. You might also be looking at additional technology advancements or ways to optimize or better use the technology that you currently have in place. Sometimes there's a need for clarifying governance, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then other things such as, really assessing yourselves against leading practices and thinking about what you can do to continue to add value to the business. So you'll see some themes related to each of these as we go through our presentation today. And then with that in mind, we want to share a framework that we use with our clients in thinking about how to identify and prioritize opportunities for improving your HR shared services model. And this is fairly basic. I'm sure many of you have seen some similar diagrams. It focuses on 4 different quadrants, and we are going to present content today in each of these categories. So I will start by talking a little bit about people and organization, then we'll move on to the other 3 going around in clockwise order. Each quadrant really represents things that you probably spent some time on during implementation, but also some potential opportunities to relook at your organization and where you might be able to identify and prioritize some improvement areas. Okay, I'm going to get us started then by talking about a few topics related to the category of people and organization. One of the key elements we consider in looking at this is your governance model. Many of you may have established that already, but if not, having a plan or a governance model in place can be really beneficial to the organization. The most common that we see is establishing some type of a governance board. That's typically made up of representatives or executives from your lines of business that you are supporting in the company, your key customer groups, as well as the executives into which the HR Shared Services organization reports, along with key support functions that you need to be successful, such as your corporate IT function. And the formality, can vary. We've seen different things work, but typically starting out a little bit more formal and then getting into a cadence with the governance board works well. And then maybe over time, it can become a little bit less formal. The key benefits for having this in place is that it gives you representation among the executive team to really have visibility and a voice related to your shared services organization. It also allows your key customers to help prioritize and influence the direction that you're taking. And related to that, they can provide input that would help to, think about what are the right things to be spending money on and where should you prioritize your initiatives. They'll have a view for what are the things that HR Shared Services is doing that can be most impactful to the business. And then another important aspect is that making sure that you stay integrated with what's going on in terms of other initiatives in the business. So giving you really a view into that and some foresight so that you're brought in early and then not having to just react in a more reactive way later on. Okay. So if you don't have something like this in place, this might be one thing you want to consider as a way to continue to advance your operations. So as we think about the broader organization of HR, we wanted to share the trend that we're seeing with the total HR staffing level across the last 3 cycles. The blue circles that you see there are the median value for total company employees served per HR FTE. And it stayed relatively steady in the last 2 cycles, and then we saw that median value did dip a bit, indicating higher staffing in HR in the 2023 data. Just for context, many of you may be familiar with other benchmarks about this total HR ratio. And these do represent much leaner HR organizations than what you might see from a more general benchmark. In fact, I looked up what the cross-industry APQC general benchmark for this is, and it's 106 at the median. We think there's a number of reasons why there's such a big difference. First off, this study only focuses on companies that have shared services in place, many of which are representing pretty mature shared services model. So that alone is going to drive more efficient HR staffing overall and allow these median values to be higher in terms of the number of employees served. The other thing too is that the study does tend to focus on larger organizations because of the suitability of the shared services model. And so that also has a factor in allowing for a more efficient HR delivery ratio there. All right. One other comment on the last page. One of the things we think that could be, I'll jump back for a minute, could be driving that increase that we're seeing in 2023 is that we know kind of coming out of COVID and the pandemic, there was a lot of pent-up turnover, and that resulted in increased hiring needs. And so HR has really had to step up to support that. In addition, HR has played a key role in terms of navigating things like hybrid work policies and associated employee engagement programs, as well as the increased emphasis being placed on DE&I programs. And so all of those we think are factors that could contribute to the slightly higher HR staffing that we're seeing this past cycle compared to the prior two cycles. So next, we're going to look a little bit at the field HR staffing. One of the areas that we often find further opportunities for improvement with is the field HR staffing. It's not always a core focus area when a shared services model or shared services center is being implemented. And so while the shared services center is a key enabler for revamping your field staff, not everybody tackles that right away. And what you see here on the page are the quartile values for company employees served for 3 different field HR roles, starting with HR business partner at the top, HR generalist in the middle, and HR administrator at the bottom. And you can see just a very high-level definition of each on the far left. On the right-hand side, we have the total field HR quartiles. And what we wanted to point out here is that the shared services model really should be an enabler to modify and refocus your field HR organization, allowing those in the field to focus more on the strategic advisory and advising managers and supervisors and so forth, and really taking a lot of that former transactional and administrative work out of those roles and moving it to the service center. So while we know that there still would be some administrative work remaining in the field typically, we're really surprised to see that the HR administrator role represents the highest staffing among these 3 different field HR roles, indicating that there's definitely some further room for improvement to reach more of an optimal model where you have taken advantage of your service center to shift that work. Continuing on our discussion about the field HR, on the left, these are those 3 roles that we kind of most commonly see. However, we do recognize that there is quite a bit of variability across the way companies will structure their field roles. Sometimes we'll see multiple titles that all have HR business partner in the title. Sometimes they'll have business partners, generalists, and something else. But what's really important is making sure that there are clearly defined roles and responsibilities, and that you're aligning the work with the right skill sets and level of the role. Focusing a bit more on that strategic HR business partner role, in our view, these are the people that are advising your senior leaders in each line of business. And in an optimal model, they're focused on things like managing talent, developing leaders, helping to drive overall business performance, and then also considering things like how they can help optimize work life for those employees to make them engaged and hopefully retained. The bottom diagram kind of shows in a traditional model, that has not been optimized or even pre-shared services. The field often has a lot of time spent on, and HR business partner often has a lot of time spent on operation and program support, as well as a big amount of time spent on administration there at the bottom at 65%. What we would aspire to and what we try to help our clients get toward is a more a diamond shape instead of the pyramid. So more time spent on strategy and policies. There's still a significant role for your field roles to play in terms of operations and programs. So coordinating with the centers of expertise to roll out new programs and facilitate those programs with the business. But the biggest difference really is in that bottom piece. And like I mentioned earlier, the goal would be to shift a significant portion of that work to the service center so that what remains makes up a much smaller portion of the job remaining in the field. And the last aspect we'll talk about is a variety of ways that the field HR team can engage with the business. We know that the demands for proactive and strategic support from HR have grown, just based on a lot of the challenges that many businesses are facing with talent, with engagement, and the need for more robust programs. And so these are a variety of tactics that you can consider. One would be certainly taking opportunities to build relationships with key stakeholders. That should involve regular meetings, both formal and informal. These help the team stay connected with what's going on in the business, having a clear understanding of what the business goals and strategies are, and thinking about how HR can support. The second would be taking opportunities to participate in cross-functional teams. This provides a lot of visibility about some of the deeper challenges and opportunities within the operations of the business. Third, we would highlight an opportunity to conduct workforce analysis. So as HR professionals, you have a lot of access to data. And so looking at analysis such as things with turnover, employee engagement, and workforce demographics, all of that can help in terms of workforce planning and identifying potential gaps and opportunities. Similarly, HR can play a role in conducting focus groups and surveys within the lines of business to really understand what's going on with the employees, where there might be some things that need to be addressed, and perhaps what's working well that could be emulated in other parts of the business. And then finally, making sure that those teams stay up to date on industry trends. This is important to understand trends that may have an impact on the workforce coming down the road, or making sure that you can help those lines of business stay ahead of the competition. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Molly, and she's going to move on to the next quadrant.
Hi, everyone. I am Molly Donofrio. I know Alyssa gave the intro at the beginning, but I'll be finishing up with the balance of our presentation. And as Karen shared, we have a framework here for thinking about both data and qualitative aspects of your organization. And so I'm going to spend time on the remaining three, starting off with policy and process. So I think we would all agree that one of the biggest changes to our workforce in the last couple of years has been the virtual workforce and the amount of change that has enabled in many of our jobs, and especially within the shared services organizations. And so we've included some information in our survey to capture that. And we wanted to share that you can see that in the top quartile of organizations, between 30 and 40% of the HR shared services workforce is working virtually. So even as the pandemic has shifted our work, people have stayed virtual, and they're able to be a top performer with a highly virtual workforce. You can see at all levels of the survey, there's a high level of virtual workforce, and the tier 1 shared services center employees are the largest group that are working virtually. So that is both enabled by technology today, as well as just, employee and company preference. So as we spend a little bit more time on this topic, we did want to get a sense from you all, the people who are on our webinar today, for how your company is managing this particular policy and process question. So we're going to put up a poll again to collect some information and see how your company is handling this today. So let me go to the next slide and we'll put up that poll. So question 1 is, if you've implemented a hybrid work model, how many days in the office do you require each week? From your perspective, or if you have any information from an employee survey, how has a hybrid work environment impacted your organization's culture? And then what role does your HR shared services organization play in the support of this virtual workforce policy? We know that there's a fair amount of administration that comes along with it. So we're interested in what role you all may play. I'll give everybody just another couple seconds to finish those answers. All right, let's close the poll and see what we have to say. So for how many days in the office are required, it looks like there's a pretty broad distribution going up to 4 days required, but most of the participants today are showing either 1 or 2 of required days. So hybrid work environment impacts to the culture. All right, the biggest responses around mixed positive and negative impact. I think that's very fair. We have some information about that on the next page. We'll talk a little bit more, but the runner up there is strong positive impact. We certainly know that it is a driver in employee satisfaction to be able to have more flexibility in their life. So this really reflects that. And then what role does your SSO play in support? So primarily answering questions around the policy or the practice. And a few people are responsible for that administration. So thanks very much for taking that poll. Let's spend a little bit more time on this topic on the next slide. So as your answers have indicated, we do believe hybrid work is here to stay, but that there are both impacts that are considered positive and potentially negative. There are some consequences. We know that work from home employees can be highly productive, especially driving employee engagement. But there are also real impacts to the business in facilities impact. So, lots of questions around how companies will handle their space, their leases, whether or not they need to downsize or give up space altogether. And then we also, on that same token, have to think about how do employees best collaborate. Many employees still do like that face-to-face time. They believe that there's better connectedness when they are in the office. And this has impacts both on facilities and on culture. We've heard that there's the question of how does kind of the secret sauce of our organization continue when we have to think of new ways to be engaged. And sometimes generations have different views on how it is better to be engaged. Older generations do seem to be more comfortable in returning to the office, whereas younger generations really like more of the work from home or flexibility. In some cases, that's all that they've ever known. The other thing that we see with culture is that turnover may increase, which can be good in some ways if there's the need for some fresh talent or managing attrition. But there's a lot of cost that comes with this turnover, including that increased need for hiring and knowledge sharing. So we know that this is a question and an issue that many companies are grappling with today and taking really different positions on how they are supposed to deal with this for their own culture. On the next slide, we'll take a look at one of the tools that is integral in the virtual workforce, and that is the employee portal and the access that employees and managers have to data and transactions. In the survey results, we have seen that most organizations are using employee and manager direct access. And this is, you can see employee direct access is at 78% of the companies surveyed, and manager direct access is at 81%. The typical transactions that are performed via that direct access or self-service are shown here, with the highest percentages being in personal data changes and employee-initiated approvals. But as we all know, there's the increasing ability to make data and transactions and access available to employees and to engage them through these portals. And it's, as I said, certainly a way that we can better enable the virtual workforce. One of the other questions that we had asked was around companies' use of an employee portal. And you can see here that at 68%, there's personalized content with system integration, which is good. We really want those employee portals to be integrated for the best experience. However, there are a number of companies out there who still have what's considered more of a static or non-personalized content. As we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the implications of both portal use and direct access to a framework of assessment and improvement. So considering both policy and process, when you think about these tools, we know that the functionality of employee portals is growing as technology increases, as functionality gets better. There's a lot of really user-friendly technology that can make an employee portal better for personalized content, that can leverage AI to improve speed of answer. And there's a lot of growth in this area that's really driven by the desire to give a better employee experience to all of their employees and to offer more services. There's really a high demand for this concept of the one-stop shop, where an employee can go to one place to do all of their services, regardless of whether it's considered an HR or finance or procurement request. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of change in this space. However, policy considerations as these changes are happening are that there's a need for additional governance and ownership and policy. Karen touched on the importance of governance earlier in our presentation, and as more functions come together, as there are more, features enabled in technology, it usually just means that more of the stakeholders have to come to the table and agree how those things are going to be both owned and administered. The other challenge is in keeping that content up to date. Efficient inquiry resolution at tier 0 and tier 1 is really dependent on harmonized policies and processes and making sure that standardization is a priority. We know that clear accountabilities around keeping that content up to date is really important. And then finally, while the idea of manager self-service or direct access is highly desirable, we know that manager workload is something that's really increasing and an area of dissatisfaction for managers themselves. And this is limiting either the use or the response time of manager self-service in the real world. So just a couple things to think about as you're thinking about growth in these areas or policy changes. So I'm going to move into the section on tools and technology now. So sharing a couple different stats around how tools and technology were surveyed in this latest survey is that one of the areas that we know drives efficiency, drives standardization, is having common platforms for both the service center or customer care groups, payroll, or HRIS to work from. So one of the survey questions showed that the majority of our survey respondents have a single instance of systems across all of the global centers. And yet there are also plenty of areas that show there's a common tool, but different configurations based on centers or regions, and still areas where there are multiple tools for administration. But in general, many of these companies have moved to create that standardization that really helps drive efficiency. We also often are asked about roles and responsibilities in technology, especially when a big new system implementation is coming, or you're really changing the way that HR technology is going to be used. Many companies are interested in, how do I in HR work collaboratively with the IT function? And so we wanted to be able to capture some data around that and have included it now in the survey. And the question is, where are the following HR technology roles performed? Is it in HRIS? Is it in IT? Or is it shared across HRIT? Or is it somewhere else? And you'll see with the areas that are more highly technical and direct system work, those are more highly performed by the IT organization, which makes a lot of sense. And then when you look at more of the kind of project-oriented or functional responsibilities, those are more typically administered or performed by the HRIS team. But I do think one of the most important call outs on this slide is how often these responsibilities are shared between the two, because that really is the way that both the functional and technical roles and responsibilities can be be represented, and usually the most collaborative way to work together. When we look at HRIS operations, 50% of survey participants are using a centralized team to support their HRIS globally. So you can see here on the pie chart that the one central HRIS team supports all regions is at 47%. A regional approach to support is at 19%, and a mix of both central and regional HRIS is at 34%. And the chart on the right-hand side of the slide gives us an idea about how many employees one HRIS FTE can support. So in the top quartile of survey respondents, one FTE supports approximately 4,000 employees. Moving on to the topic that we hear in the news every single day, intelligent automation. What role does that play in the shared services organization? And the answers in our survey is that it plays a very large role. And this is an area that we obviously have seen a lot of growth in the last few years. Now, the first question asked is, to what extent does your shared services center use intelligent automation applications? And you can see that even if people aren't actually using it or implemented it, they're at least planning to with a pilot or thinking about using it. And The biggest change has been the number of organizations that have implemented IA over the last few years. You can see on the right-hand side, in 2019, only 17% of the respondents answered yes, that they had implemented. And now in this last year's cycle, over 60% of the respondents have implemented IA. And on the next slide, we'll get into a few more details around what they are actually using and what has been implemented. So the increase is come from both process automation and from conversational solutions. And so the largest percentage of use in process automation is in process automation using knowledge-based rules. That's at 38%. And then the highest percentage in conversational solutions is using virtual agents to help draw upon employee information from either your HRIS system or from other responses, and that's at 60%. But you can see, even outside of those, the highest rated ones, there is a significant implementation of these tools in order to help make more efficient service and take advantage of the technology. So in our final quadrant of data and knowledge, when you are looking to both get a good idea of how the shared services organization is performing, as well as how to share data and knowledge with stakeholders or with customers, we have some information in the next couple of slides to share some frameworks for thinking about this. So first is thinking about service management and an organization or operations of the shared services org themselves. We have a quick process to share around, how to organize this work, especially if you're one of those groups that's newly implemented and looking to create some organization around this. First, you create that metrics inventory and understand where your baselines are. Second, perform a review cycle and think about what you may want to track that's not included in your inventory, and share this with stakeholders to make sure that the metrics that you're pulling and collecting are aligning with what your either HR leadership is looking for or what other stakeholders in that governance group may be interested in. Third, there's development to actually test, make sure that the values that are being produced make sense and, adjust as needed. And then finally, it's training, making sure that the teams who are responsible for completing the transactions that provide the data are understanding what are things for, what is important to do in order to make sure that that baseline is being, or the metrics are being tracked accurately. So just a couple of things to think about as you're thinking about how to share or organize data. On the next slide, we want to share some data from our survey that highlights some operational benchmarks. And these are median values and values that give a good sense of how performance is among many of your peers. So first, we'll talk a couple cost benchmarks. At the top of the slide, you can see that at median, the total HR shared services cost per employee served is $224. And then the total cost of HR function per organization employee is at $490. Then looking at a couple more operational benchmarks, we have first contact resolution, which is one of the primary measures for response at that tier 1 and tier 2 levels, and that's at 78% resolved on first contact, with average speed to answer a telephone call at 33 seconds. And you'll see just another asterisk here that most of the data is pulled from North American service centers. And then finally, the benchmark here on kind of throughput for transactions and calls and inquiries is that annually, roughly 4,000 transactions per tier 1 FTE is at median, and 6,667 are at calls and inquiries are for that tier 1 FTE. And when you look at roughly what does that mean per day, I think it's about 15 transactions per day and 26 calls. So roughly 41 cases or transactions that a tier 1 rep would complete per day at the median. So as we get to the kind of end of our presentation, just want to share one more on data and knowledge. And this goes to, again, thinking about how to manage the high volume of data that is being produced by a service center organization. We do have a framework that helps make some recommendations around kind of how to share and who to share the data with. And that's at the level 1 level. There are operational performance indicators with a kind of sample dashboard to the right that are helping drive the day-to-day operations of a center, help understand what the tactical actions are for the day. And those are, that's information that's usually held more internally to the operation and shared with leadership of the shared services organization. As you move up the pyramid into more tactical performance indicators and strategic indicators, those are the indicators that the business or the governance board may be interested in how performance overall is within the center and what kind of data you're able to glean from the information that you have at your fingertips. So just a straightforward way to think about kind of how do you organize the data and who do you share it with. So we'll wrap up and make sure that we have some time for questions now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Molly and Karen, for sharing your experience, sharing your expertise with us today. So as Molly said, we'll move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So I'd like to invite listeners, if you haven't already, please submit any questions that you have for Molly and Karen. We do have some questions already. Molly, on that slide where you presented the different metrics, I think it was just a couple slides back, we had a listener ask about what the time period was for those metrics.
I
may ask Karen to answer that one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Those are all annual. The volume, you're probably asking with regard to the annual number or the volume numbers, and those are annual volumes. And then I think Molly kind of translated that into a per day benchmark as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So I have a couple questions. We don't have any other. Oh, wait, one just came in. So this question is from Doris, and she asks, how can one cultivate appreciation for HR shared services when leadership seems uninterested or doesn't yet see the potential in an HR shared services investment?
That is definitely a hard situation. I would say that, if you're at the beginning of your business case for making shared services a proposition for your company, there's a lot of information for how you can drive up employee engagement, both from people within HR because they have clear roles and responsibilities that come with their job and kind of clear accountabilities for doing the work that is sometimes not part of the work. If you don't have that shared services and engage center, you have people kind of having their hands involved with everything, and it can make for a very busy and distracting day. There's also a lot of drivers for employees who would be the customers interacting with shared services. They can get information very quickly through the technology that's enabled. They get more standard answers. And, there's a lot of benefits, both from a process and a cost perspective for shared services. So certainly a big topic to tackle, and one that I think Karen or I could help more with. If we'll share our contact information at the end if you want to reach out.
Great. Thank you, Molly. And the next question, I believe, Karen, you may have talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but this attendee wants to know what was the sample number of companies, the data that you presented based on?
Yeah, I think the actual number was 101 participating organizations in this last cycle, and that's typically been what we've strived for with each cycle. So when you, in the couple of pages that we showed the multi-cycle trend, it's roughly 100 per cycle.
Excellent. Thank you so much. At the moment, we have no more listener questions. I had just a question or two for you, depending on time. Karen, while you're on, maybe you could talk about kind of the future skill set for service center staff. What types of skills do you see organizations looking to either hire for or to develop in their service center staff?
Sure. I think certainly technology skills have always been important, but are becoming even more important. If you think about some of the data you saw on how technology is being integrated with service center operations. So, some of your reps may be responsible for handling chat responses and need to be comfortable with that interface. But even historically, it's been a key role because of your service management technologies. You need people who are comfortable with your case management, comfortable navigating the knowledge base so that they can find the relevant answers for whoever's calling. And, we find that that's even more critical than having the HR knowledge. I would say we also think problem solving is a key skill that many are trying to hire for. You want your people to be able to find solutions and know how to, if it's not straightforward, what to do next and how to handle a problem that comes in. And then customer service has always been a skill that we view as very critical, and often companies will find opportunities to recruit people that might be working in another customer service organization within the company or from outside that have that as a key skill set.
Excellent. Thank you. Another listener question came in. What do you think about using GPTs like OpenAI as a solution for HR shared services centers? So I know Molly touched a little bit on intelligent automation, so I'll leave it to you, Karen and Molly, to decide who wants to start.
I can take that one. I think we think that there's a lot of potential and can certainly see the value in kind of speed of response and user experience with something like a OpenAI solution. Balanced with that is all of the questions around kind of policy and data privacy and governance. So if you are pointing a chat GPT or OpenAI at your information, one would want to make sure that you have control in that it's not then going to be open to everyone using the tool. And then there's, also the question of that data integrity. So how do you keep the data, keep integrity solid to be able to keep the information accurate? So those are questions that I think many people are grappling with right now in order to try to figure out how best to use the technology.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to move on to some of our wrap-up slides. Believe we have a slide coming up. If Molly or Karen, you could talk about how people can connect with you, how people might be able to participate in future benchmarking studies.
Sure. I'll note here so you can find both just our general email information here. Contact us at info@scottmadden.com. If you have questions about the webinar itself today, or if you're interested in participating in a study. As you heard from Karen at the beginning, we do perform these studies in cycles, and we have just wrapped up the HR cycle this year with the 2023 survey. So the next time we'll be kicking that one off is in early 2025, but we are always happy to take your name now and put you on a list that we can reach back out to you at that time. And then there's also the finance survey that is starting next year. So if you're interested in being a participant there, you can get started even earlier. But you'll see a few key facts here about the survey. It is unique. There is no cost to participate. And if you do participate, you do receive the full report of key metrics and qualitative results from the survey. So we hope that some of you are interested. We'd love to get more people involved, and also would love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. And just want to remind all of our listeners that you will receive a copy of the slides and recording within 2 business days. Please, as the webinar closes out, if you would take our webinar satisfaction survey, we'd appreciate your feedback, and encourage you to visit apqc.org to learn more about our upcoming webinars and events, and also to watch any of our APQC webinars on demand. We have a slide that you'll see when you receive your slide deck with some related APQC content collections on the topic of HR shared services. And we'd love you to connect with APQC on social via LinkedIn. Check out our blog or our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, Molly and Karen, for presenting today. And thank you to all of our listeners.
Thanks, everybody.